I'll talk to you a little bit about Bonterra's latest impact report, which is called Building the Generosity Generation, Actionable Insights from our 2025 Impact Report. And yes, Bonterra has produced an impact report before. You may have seen it last year, and you've seen other impact reports, but this one, I would argue, is different. And so what makes it so different? It provides cross-sector actionable insights to really help drive social impact. It offers immediate strategies for you to help navigate today's evolving fundraising and giving landscape. And it also introduces what we are calling the generosity generation. That's a pan-age community of doers and givers at every stage of the philanthropic journey. I encourage you to check out this report. We'll be dropping it into the chat later on in this presentation, so you'll be able to access that and learn a little bit more about the tools that we have with it. But with this report, we didn't want to just look back and go, oh, here's what happened in 2024. Instead, we want to look forward. We want to explore what's working now, what's next for our sector, and how you can apply those insights in your own work. So you're going to find some metrics that you can use to really go back to your board and share some market statistics, as well as some things that might be relevant to your own work. There'll be next practices for fundraising, grant making, and program delivery. And there's also some amazing real stories and solutions for from nonprofits, corporate funders, and other foundation peers. So there's a lot packed into this report, but to make it easier, we've identified 6 key takeaways that we're going to cover during today's conversation. These are the 6 takeaways. First, we're going to talk about how we can and how nonprofits can convert prospects into champions, how to invest in the power of trust, how to strengthen giving. Sorry, I'm got like a cover here. Sorry, to strengthen giving at work, how to evaluate your own fundraising strategy, how to respond to crisis in record time so that you can raise more, do more, and hopefully retain more for your organization, how to find your ideal match through grant making, and also how to convert those prospects into champions. So if we can go on to the next slide, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Ben Miller, to talk a little bit about converting prospects into champions. Ben.
Thank you, Kimberly. And hi, everyone. I am Ben. I am in charge of data science and analytics at Bonterra, and excited to talk to you today about the trends that we have found in the data to support improving philanthropy, which is what we're trying to achieve here. So this very first slide, I'm going to take a moment on it because it's one of the most important issues we face, and I don't want to run right by it, which is retention rates have been declining for some time. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, but it's been tracking since 2006 fundraising trends happening. And over the last decade or more, there's been a steady decline in retention rates, especially new donor retention rates, which is down to 19.4% in 2024. So if you just stop and think about that, and as we go through this today, we're going to be turning to our panelists and asking questions to try to get perspective on each of these different trends. So I'd be interested to hear if anyone has thoughts on this, but 19.4% means that less than one out of every five new donors, it does not come back the next year. And with how expensive it is to acquire a donor and how continuing that cost continues to go up, it has become a real big challenge. Now, couple that with the existing donor retention, which is also declining, and you've got a real issue. And so one of the things we'll be looking at today is how to combat that. What are some ways that we can do something about retention declining? And so what we have here is an opportunity is focusing on converting your first-time donors to second-time donors. Okay, that's pretty obvious answer, right? But perhaps one that we need to bold, underline, and capitalize because it is perhaps the most important thing to do. That second gift is so important. Once you get that second gift, just like we saw later on, we'll be talking about with grant applications, and it applies across the board. first time sort of a test. First time is like, let's see what, how does this feel? Do I like this organization? Second gift is, all right, I'm liking what's happening, and then the develop of the relationship can happen from there. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide to I'm sorry, talk through what else we found. So one of the things you'll see in the top right there is that we were able to like statistically significantly correlate clicks with an average donation amount. So every click generated $39 in donations, right? Now that doesn't mean every click generates a donation, but what we've found is that obviously tried and true techniques of trying to get people to click and engage with the organization, find out more, has a positive correlation with the amount of money. We also found that like sending out emails, there are certain times, weekends don't look so great, but Thursdays and Tuesdays, mid-morning, are great times to send emails to get engagement. And so there's some just helpful ways to be thinking about how you might engage with your donors. And don't wait to ask. So I want to say that, but I want to say it with like some context. Don't wait to ask, but don't just ask, right? If you're doing is saying like, hey, it's time for a second gift, and they've just given you a gift, you're missing a big opportunity. You have to invite them into the organization. You have to develop the relationship. You can't just treat them like an ATM. So while I'm saying ask again, I'm not saying treat your donors like they are a cash register. So I want to make that distinction clear. A lot of times we feel bad as a nonprofit sector. We feel guilty about asking for money, and we shouldn't. We should be feeling great about the good work we're doing and inviting people to join us rather than, the transactional relationship with the donor. So with that, I wanted to turn to Mike and Larry here from ABT, American Battlefield Trust, and I wanted to ask a question to you. You described Bonterra Every Action as a game changer, and I wanted to know if you could walk us through how it helped American Battlefield Trust move beyond direct mail and create more targeted and effective outreach.
Sure, I'll start with that, Ben. Thank you. And just to go off script for a quick second, I would just say that the American Battlefield Trust embodies this call to action of don't wait to ask again more than any other organization I've ever been a part of, in that we found that the best time to ask for another gift is after a first gift, when people's interest is already heightened in your organization. And we don't ask for the same thing, though. That's where we have a benefit, I think, and an advantage sometimes, is where we save American Battlefield land, and next month there's another tract of land that we're saving. So we actually have a really high rate of recurring donations because people are giving time and again to different tracts of land that they find that they want to save, and they're invested in saving that land. But to your question, Ben, I think I'll go back to the other side of the slide here in investing in email. When I arrived at the American Battlefield Trust in 2017, we were really a direct mail agency, or a direct mail nonprofit, very successful at that, with very little presence in email communication. That changed when we invested in Every Action and brought Every Action on board. And it was a game changer for a number of reasons. One was that it was honestly just so easy to use compared to our prior system. So we could get in there and, without a whole lot of help or any help, create messaging that we knew how to do, right? We were doing the direct mail well. And so we were able to version really easily what was working in direct mail in email communications, and also create a kind of a surround sound, I would say, for communication. So it's not just email, but it's those other channels that your constituents are listening in, like social media, for example. So how do we complement the ask that we're making by what else we're doing in social media, for example? Can we get people excited or let them know what's happening to their investment, those dollars that they're giving us, through social media and email follow-up? And in email follow-up, thanks to Mike's good work, we're doing a lot of that exact work where we're able to say, hey, this is what you've helped save. So we got rid of that antiquated system for email. EA made email outreach really easy. And then, COVID hit, And we became even more aware of Every Action's capabilities to keep people informed about our work, as our work necessarily had to move online for at least, about a year's period. And we had to communicate about, well, what could people do to not only support us, but to continue to follow their interest in American history online through Zoom webinars that we were doing at the time. And our ability to communicate about those webinars at the time was really great, and it helped build an audience that's really lasted with us past the pandemic. And Mike, I know you have some more to say about that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to jump in and talk a little bit about our first-time donor strategy, which is that, every donor that gives, whether it's $1 or $100 to the American Battlefield Trust, whether it's their first gift or their 50th gift, they're immediately treated like part of the family. They immediately receive an acknowledgement of their gift. That's automated through Every Action. And if they've opted into email updates, they enter into a welcome series that will walk them through a tour of the American Battlefield Trust and really let them know what they've just joined into. It's a 3-message series. It gives them an overview of our main organizational pillars, which is land preservation, education, and restoration and interpretation. Basically, it's a tour of what they just joined. And we don't take those first-time donors and isolate them into a silo. We show them right away what they're contributing to, and we hit them with opportunities that are urgent and ongoing. And because we want them to feel like they're a part of something and like they're helping. So we send out over 300 emails a year. We send out about an email a day at this point. And we're just reaching out over and over again. Sometimes it's for an urgent land appeal. Sometimes it's for an advocacy effort that we're leading the charge on. But we just want them involved. And I think what really drives the repeat giving is that we can show tangible value. The tangible value of saving battlefield land. These aren't really passive donors. These are people that are passionate about the history, but they know that they can't really do this alone. You can't save hundreds of acres by yourself. And so through the trust, they're joining something bigger. They're part of a collective that can really, so we're bringing meaning to their donations and bringing meaning to their interest in history.
And one more point, if I may, the last couple of years, we've added SMS messaging to the mix, which has been great. And it helps us, looking at this datum here, Ben, about the best time to send messages. We're able to see that too on the SMS side and plan accordingly.
Wonderful, great information. Thank you so much for both of you sharing that information. A lot of good lessons there learned about automating, about engaging. I love the line, treat them like family. That is the way we should be thinking about our communities that we are engaging with for the nonprofit sector as a whole. I just love the concept. And while you had a lot of good techniques there, I didn't hear a transactional mindset of like, let's get them to be doing donations, and rather than everything I heard was let's find out what they're like, engage with them, etc. So I love the tips and strategies you have there. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Lauren, who is going to take over the next slide.
Yep. And I'm going to talk about maybe not family, but also it's a good segue into talking about partnership. So I really want to talk about more on the grant seeking side, where you're looking for and developing these longer sustaining larger funding partnerships. And we know that it can be finding the right partner to support a nonprofit's mission. It can be frustrating. It can be challenging for many nonprofits. And similarly, grant makers often do a ton of research to identify what organizations are making impact in areas that align with their funding pillars. So as a result, the grant application process can also often be a barrier to finding significant sources of funding and partnership. We often hear that the cost in terms of effort to a nonprofit to complete an application sometimes exceeds the value of the grant. You don't have to spend 8 hours filling out a grant application for a grant that's maybe only $1,000 or $5,000. And we found that about 41% of nonprofits lack the necessary readiness to manage every phase of that grant process, from researching all the way through application, sort of receiving the funding and the program management. Organizations that diversify their grant applications and persist beyond that initial, I'm sorry to say rejection, because they will happen, are more likely to secure funding and strengthen their financial resilience. And this is where we see AI-powered tools really increasing capacity on a nonprofit to identify those funders that are going to be a great fit and develop that great relationship and maybe even a family feeling, and that can also automate components of the application process to, again, reduce that sort of overhead burden, especially if you're a smaller organization that might be running on volunteer power. But don't give up. Don't be discouraged, right? About 30% of nonprofits give up after one rejection. It's like, this was a lot of work. It didn't work out. I'm going to go do something else. But on average, we find it takes about 1.25 applications to receive funding. So like, keep on going, and try a couple different things, right? Try more smaller requests, again, if it's an efficient and effective application process. Nonprofits that apply to multiple smaller grants will end up receiving more funds on average than nonprofits that only apply to one larger grant. I think another thing is also when you find those smaller grants, that gets you a foot in the door with that funder, which then might turn into repeat funding and also increase gift amounts, right? Versus sort of aiming for the biggest one at your first go. But I'd really actually love to talk to Lynn, who's joined us from Ally Financial about it. And Lynn, I know at Ally Financial you do a lot of grant funding. So would love to hear from you about the criteria that you use when evaluating which foundations or nonprofits to partner with.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren, and amazing to be here with you all today. So how I would describe it is, there's a great team of people here at Ally and the corporate citizenship team, so that have a variety of superpowers. And so we do have a small but mighty team focused on all the things, grant review and making those often difficult funding decisions. But we, as a function, lead a really balanced approach to the reviews in terms of content and fairness and ultimately sometimes difficult decisions. While we prioritize our funding in Charlotte and Detroit, it's where our roots are strongest, two headquarter cities. We also support nonprofits nationwide through a variety of other ways, including our employees' presence and service, et cetera. So really creating a holistic approach to sometimes non-traditional funding methods. Our charitable foundation really focuses on 3 pillars: financial education, affordable housing, and workforce development, which also helps us lean into our core strengths, but also understand nonprofits who are really doing great work in the space, and that would be such a wonderful partner, if you will, in creating change in our communities. So, obviously we focus on LMI communities, populations, for all the reasons we all know on this phone call. And we, appreciate nonprofits that can clearly articulate the stories. Sometimes the stories behind the why and what they do are as impactful as the traditional impact report. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second.
Fantastic. Yep. So can you tell us a little bit more, Lynn, about that storytelling and how important measuring impact is when you're making those decisions?
Sure. So as I alluded to, my own, spoiler alert was that both are essential. Measurable impact is really important, particularly dependent on grant size. It's really important for my team and my peers' team to be able to tell the story on the why. And if we could couple it with a story on, and here's what happened. Here's the result of what your funds helped support and allowed the nonprofit to do and continue doing. It's just those really are super impactful. And our goal is always to meet nonprofits where they are. We often, for a variety of reasons, accept annual reports or just client stories to help further the narrative. It helps tell the story and makes people feel something around how the support really reflects real change. The numbers validate the work, certainly, and they're always appreciated, but stories create connection and really help us communicate collective community impact more meaningfully.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think that's an excellent point of sort of meeting nonprofits where they are. And we'll kind of, spoiler alert, talk about that a little bit more when we talk about employee engagement. But understanding that everybody sort of on both sides of this partnership have their own needs and their own requirements. So how can we make this beneficial for both you at Ally and your stakeholders and your peer groups, as well as those folks who are in the community doing the work? So it's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to turn it back over to Kimberly to talk about crisis, responding to crisis.
Thanks, Lauren. And I can't share enough how important those stories truly are in sharing with funders, donors, and your community, and the power that they have behind them. But let's talk a little bit about crisis fundraising. It is on the upswing. We are seeing more crisis through natural disasters, environmental challenges, social and political changes. And so what we are finding is that the majority of people who give, they will support disaster relief. And so while crises are going up and crisis giving is increasing, organizations have expressed concern to me over having more competition in this sector because there are more crises to support. Yet what we're finding is that of those who want to give during crises, they often don't know where to find information on giving. And so that's a really important thing to think about within each of your organizations for our nonprofits who are out there. How easy are you making it for organizations to give, and how are you communicating as you see your organization affecting whatever this crisis may be? And so that's really important. And it's important to think about what tools you have in place can act very quickly, because what we know is that timely, localized, proactive fundraising before and during crises drives exponential surges in donations. It attracts new supporters and it broadens awareness for your cause. So it's important to have those tools so that you can communicate quickly, and those metrics that are so important to be able to show the impact that you're making. And if we move on to the next slide, we can dive into this a bit further. What it's like to be crisis ready. So first and foremost, it's really important to have a plan in place before crisis hits. And so that means developing a simple but effective crisis fundraising strategy, and then making sure that your team, the entire team, is ready to act on that so that it's not such a scary thing for them to step in. I recommend having that plan in place and then refreshing it regularly, maybe even tying it to an annual drill or review, and also having your metrics ready and accessible by your entire team to act on. And here's why preparation is so important. Nonprofits see an average of, look at that number, everyone, 1,735% more, an increase in new donors during a natural disaster. That means that you have a very narrow window, because as donations will, what we found is that donations will typically surge one day before and up to 3 days after the crisis. So you have 4 days to really maximize your giving. Giving will have a tail afterwards likely, but those 4 days are so critical. Right now, if you were to stop and think about how your organization would respond to a crisis in a 4-day window, would you be ready to activate and truly raise as much as you can for your very important mission? And so as you think about that, think about acquiring a wave of donors, and then how you might keep them, because donor retention is so critical for this influx of donations and new donors. Let's take a look back to 2020, when after George Floyd's murder, Black Lives Matter gained 400,000 new donors. Imagine that happening to your organization. Would your systems be ready? Would your messaging be ready? Would your stewardship be ready to activate on 400,000 new donors? Because if not, you're likely to lose those donors just as quickly as you gained them. Now, those organizations that do activate, mobilize, and are ready to go, like Texas Diaper Bank, who is profiled in our impact report, have amazing and continued success. I had the privilege of visiting Texas Diaper Bank after their efforts related to Hurricane Harvey, and they have been able to scale their organization both in size of warehouse that they have, new trucks that they have, as well as the different services that they offer, because they were able to manage the relationships with their donors, keep everything moving and activated. Their CEO shares in the report that it was like that the giving was like a hurricane itself, but a very good hurricane, and they've been able to really harness that into new efforts for their organization, which is a true success story. So I have some questions for our esteemed panelists, and I want to start with American Battlefield Trust. How has your organization dealt with the rapid response to crises, both the pandemic, policy changes, and how are you reaching out to donors and volunteers when it matters most? What are some of the takeaways that you can give our viewers today?
I'll kick this one off. Larry already talked a little bit about COVID. COVID was a crisis, and it was really my first major test upon joining the American Battlefield Trust. And you know, we're an activity-heavy organization, and at that time we couldn't host tours. We couldn't get people out on the battlefield, so we really, as Larry mentioned, we really drove a lot of our engagement online to our website, and we created special experiences for folks so that they could still engage with us on the battlefield, just in a different way. So we created virtual tours, virtual field trips for students, all sorts of new content so that people could still feel like they were engaging with us. And Bonterra's tools really helped us respond fast during that time. We were able to reach out to our members, let them know that things were changing, and that we were going to be doing things in a different way during the COVID period. So Larry's talked about that a little bit already. I also look at, you know, for us, crises are real. We're looking at development threats to the battlefields all the time, and we need to be ready to activate immediately. So when a battlefield's at risk, we don't just rally our supporters. We actually go to court sometimes. Right now, we have 2 active lawsuits. One in Prince William County, right next to the Manassas battlefield, another down in Orange, Virginia, at the Wilderness battlefield. And we've really taken this opportunity to activate our members digitally. We use the advocacy module in every action to get those folks to sign petitions, sign letters to local leaders, and expressing their concern about inappropriate development on the battlefield. And when we do those asks, we also ask for donations to a advocacy fund that we established a couple of years ago, just for such occasions, where when we're facing an imminent threat to the battlefield, we want to be prepared to act, and we need to have a fund to be able to move forward on some of these lawsuits. So that's just one way. Larry, I'll throw it over to you.
No, I would just say that you're talking about urgency, and urgency really is a critical ingredient in our fundraising. And it's not made up urgency, and our donors understand that. So we usually have a window of time within which we can save land, or it has to be sold to someone else, or may be sold to someone else. Mike talked about very real court cases. That's another example where urgency comes into play. And we communicate really well, I think, about that urgency. But one other thing I would say is that it's not only about disasters and urgency, it's also about keeping your ear to the ground about what your donors may be interested in even in pop culture. One example that comes to mind is, as a lot of people were watching Severance this year, there was a mention of Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor is a Civil War battle and a battlefield. And we took the opportunity to make a video about Cold Harbor, sort of for those Severance viewers who are also, interested potentially in American history, or even just unlocking what was going on in the television show through that phrase. And we captured a lot of people that way coming to our web pages for the first time because they were Severance viewers who were interested in that phrase. So I think that being aware of what is going to move your donor, what they're already interested in, and trying to respond to that is really key.
Thanks, Larry. A great example of what is called newsjacking, right? Being able to tie something going on in the news to your work, and so cool. Lynn, quick question for you. How are you engaging and mobilizing employees to meet the moment when a disaster or crisis occurs?
Sure. No, thank you for the question. And just to echo my friends Larry and Mike, we all have learned so much, right, since the pandemic. That was a different something than any of us, I assume any of us have ever experienced in that way. And so what was born out of it was the need for more robust processes around crisis communications. We have a template that we use to help determine how and when we mobilize particular resources in a geography. But we always, as part of this three-legged stool of crisis communications, a process around decisions, our third leg of the stool is caring for our own. So we have an employee relief fund where we provide small dollar grants to our employees who may have been impacted by the disaster. So it happened with Hurricane Helene, et cetera. And, we were able to respond to them quickly. And then we also make, obviously, choices around charitable contributions related to the impacted area, depending on a variety of criteria on our rubric, if you will. But probably not most meaningful, but I guess meaningful to me is our volunteer efforts within times of disaster. While we don't typically mobilize employees, they mobilize themselves. They find a cause using Cybergrants Bonterra tool to understand what causes exist in that particular geography, and they follow their hearts. We do use the opportunity within the volunteer database to set up a fundraiser drive so employees can give dollars as well to support and join in the effort. So it creates this collective impact within our own organization to create this one ally approach, if you will, where we're meeting employee needs. We're helping to support the local needs in the impacted areas, and also caring for customers that may have been impacted as well.
I love the one ally concept. That's fabulous. Ben, I'm going to turn things over to you for our fourth insight.
Thank you, Kimberly. And I love that last discussion. I'm going to weave it into this discussion here, right? Because one of my first entrees into fundraising was a hurricane, and trying to figure out a predictive model that would help figure out how many of the new donors would convert to a second gift donor, because it was a real problem. And I also wanted to clarify, I know Kimberly was going through some numbers there, pulling some from our impact report and some that were on our PowerPoint. The 1,300 that was up there, as she was saying, the 1,700%, both enormously big numbers about uprise. 1,700 was new donors, which is exactly the problem that I was trying to solve. Like, these new donors come in, the 1,300 was just generally how much money is raised. So both of those things are true, and both it was actually quite difficult to walk through that data, because you want to make sure that, when you have an organization like Black Lives Matter bringing in so much after, like, the George Floyd murder, that you have to kind of modulate this so that so that 1,700% and 1,300% is actually after we've removed outliers, and so it is quite that bad. And the other thing I wanted to say about that, as it's going to tie into this, is that it really shows, and the first point I made, which is about retention, it really shows that there's this like untapped generosity across us that like when a need happens. I think Stephen in the comments was talking about the horrible hurricanes and was it Kentucky or and I'm sorry, not hurricanes, tornadoes and horrible destruction. When something like that happens, it's human to think, how can I help? Right? You can see that there's need, there's strength. And I think transparency, which is what you're seeing here about trust and trust in nonprofits being fairly low at 57%. I'm going to weave these two things together, and then I'll turn it over for questions here in a second. But my point is that if you're authentic and you're transparent, you can't treat everything as it's a 5-alarm fire, right? You have to make sure that when something's happening and it is urgent and it is need, that you capitalize on it and be ready for it. But if you then take the approach of like, well, how do I replicate that with every communication? And so every time your donor is hearing from you, it is as if, there was this deadly tornado or hurricane or murder that you're trying, or people coming after, your battlefield, bringing it back into that story. If you don't use the transparency with your donors and you show them like this is really urgent and this is not, then they start to lose faith with you as well. And with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. I know I'm trying to weave all of these stories together, but this next one will help. One of the things that we were trying to do to help build trust is identify sustaining donors, right? When you have a sustainer, in our view, that is telling you that they trust you like implicitly, right? They're willing to have you have money coming out of their bank account every single month, right? And so it just really shows how impactful it is to build that trust. Once you have it, they're 8 times as likely, I'm sorry, is valuable as 8 times as much as a non-recurring donor. And it's just exemplar of when you have built that trust, how it can really amplify your impact. Another way about doing that is customizing your ask. So, we have this product called Optimized Ask, which uses best practices and predictive models. And what it is able to do is that it is able to personalize an ask for a particular person, right? So if I'm at a $25 range versus if I'm at a $2,000 range or $400, somewhere in between, if you're not, meeting the donor where they are, to borrow a phrase that you're saying, I think we were saying meeting with nonprofit where they are, but if we don't meet the donors where they are, then we lose that trust. And we can see just by personalizing that ask, it's an 11% increase in donation, right? So leveraging the data we have, leveraging the tools we have to foster trust is just ever so critical. And I'll get off my soapbox and I'm going to turn these questions now back to the panelists. And so I'd like to know if there's some real world examples of how where Bonterra software has helped organizations foster trust, but software in general to help build and foster the trust there with your donors. So I'm turning that over to American Battlefield.
Cool. I'm happy to jump in. I'll just talk about Optimized Ask for a second, because I once we turned it on, we never turned it off because we could see that it was working, and it shows that we're paying attention. If somebody gives us a $100 donation, and the next time we reach out to them, we ask for 25. It feels impersonal. There's, we want to match their behavior and reinforce that relationship. So, if you gave us $100 last time, let's make sure we're asking for $100 next time. And Optimize Ask lets us do that consistently every single time. And I think that that's one really nice way of just growing that long-term loyalty and not creating any of that weird dissonance that can happen.
Wonderful. And I wonder, yeah, go ahead, Larry.
No, please, Ben, go ahead.
I was wondering, I was going to turn the question, into like, how we talked a little bit about the storytelling and transparency, and I was talking about it a little there. And I was hearing earlier about, when battlefields are at risk or when there are litigation or there, how important is it to weave that storytelling and making sure it's transparent, and how hard is it? Is my question.
Well, I think it's really important, and we definitely use the capabilities built into the system to customize and tailor our asks. So, for example, we know that a data center being built in or near Manassas is more important to Virginians.
Right.
So we will use centric targeting for that ask, or if we're doing a bit of advocacy, we'll do that. Something else that we're about to get started with is to use the Ocean framework of personality traits to and ingest what we know about people into every action, so that we can then further tailor. So it goes beyond the good advice Mike gave us about not asking for 20 after you've gotten $100 gift, but more what personality traits should we do we know that we can then use to help people approach people the way they want to be approached, and the way that we think they'll be most open to our requests. So the system allows us to do that, add custom fields, and that's what we'll be doing over the next number of months. So if we can come back and talk about that sometime, we'll have some data to report.
Oh, would love to hear about it. And I'm going to turn the question over to Lynn here in just a second, but I want to turn it around for just a second. I mean, you're talking about making sure you know where the donor is, what the donor preferences are, and for one, this is an area where AI will be able to start helping and personalize that communication and making sure that we can meet the donor where they are. But what I've always thought is that a funder is not anything different than a donor, right? And so a funder is funding a nonprofit, and when we talk about it from the funder's lens, and I'm hoping that we can ask you how it looks when you develop this trust with an organization. I think it's the same with the donor as well, right? Like, and so the donor needs to trust the organization needs to trust the donor. There needs to be this relationship built, right, in all of this, and I think that's sort of at the heart of it. And so, Lynn, I wanted to know, how does trust develop between organizations and funders?
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the question. I'm going to start with just a really brief story, and it was something that I learned at the last Cyber Grants conference I attended, where a panel of nonprofit organizations were sharing authentically and really honestly about the unintended impact that funders sometimes have with our asks of them. And so one of the things that was shared was the enormous amount of time nonprofits spend on validating volunteer hours. Organizations like ours was asking, for every hour volunteered, a nonprofit says, yep, that's exactly what happened. We validate that. And so our first action in terms of that was to turn that off. So if the employee says they did it, and it takes the burden off the nonprofit. But one of the things I'm most proud of at Ally is that leadership and the grants team made the decision to embrace trust-based philanthropy. While most of us know what that concept is, we as an organization had not utilized it before, but it's trust starts with removing barriers. So through our trust-based philanthropy program, we support smaller grassroots-led organizations in Charlotte and Detroit that often might be overlooked by traditional funding models based on their size and their ability to fit in the mold, if you will, of the grant application and all the things. So we know that the secret sauce is that these groups are deeply embedded in their communities, and they just so often lack the resources or the bandwidth to meet our rigid requirements. So in addition to flexible grant funding over a couple of years or more, with these select group of nonprofits, we offer also wraparound support like sponsorship dollars or skills-based volunteerism, or access to the executive director or someone on the staff to some professional development. We fund all the training and so forth for nonprofit leaders and staff, and then create a cohort with their peers for shared learnings. This collaborative is a hands-on approach. It helps build long-term trust, but it also gives a hand up to nonprofits who ultimately may not be as small as they were in the past because of the learnings and the support that us and other funders provide to organizations such as those. So something that I'm super proud of, and think that we all should embrace some level of that in terms of funding. So yeah, that trust starts with removing barriers.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Wonderful. I love that. I feel like the family's coming back into it, relationships, trust, it is all part of it. So I appreciate that, Lynn. Thank you for fielding the questions. I'm going to turn my this over to Lauren.
I just love that we're talking about families and trust and relationships because it's at the core of everything. And I think trust continues into this next, I think this might be our final item, which is really around how do we strengthen the relationship between employees and their employers. And there's really trust in there too. And especially there's been study upon study upon study about how employees want to work for employers that prioritize social impact and really have a sense of purpose combined with their work. This is especially critical for Gen Z, for millennials, but really everyone I think wants to feel a sense of purpose from their employer. But what we've been seeing is a decline in that overall employee engagement. A recent Gallup poll showed that engagement is at a 10-year low. So, one thing that we can think about doing, or one way to improve that, is to instill that culture of purpose and engagement at a company. And it often starts from the top down. There's other sort of tactical levers you can pull as an employer around driving overall employee engagement. Healthy competition is always fun in terms of volunteerism, in terms of getting people engaged in workplace giving. Gift matches or other good things. Think about it. Employees are donors. They're volunteers. They're doing this outside of their work. So how do you incentivize them through your workplace by saying, "Hey, we'll offer you a match," or like Lynn mentioned earlier, we'll offer volunteer opportunities because a crisis happened in your community and you want to act on it, right? How can an employer show up for their employees? So there's a lot of different things that can be done. Reducing friction and making it possible for employees is critical. And as we've said, with all of the different groups we've talked about, is meeting those employees where they are. So you make it easy for them. But we don't want to hear from me. I'd rather talk to Lynn about what they're doing from Ally and how they engage employees. And I just want to shout out Lynn and the full team at Ally for their strong, fantastic culture of impact and engagement, which starts at the top with their CEO. So 73% of Ally employees are engaged in some way in their community, which is like, again, shout out, amazing, because it far exceeds the sort of financial industry average of around sort of 32% of engagement. So 73 to 32, pretty impressive, Lynn. So what I would love to understand from you is if you can just walk us through how your team is using technology, using cyber grants, really to track and measure and report on the ROI of how Ally is making investments in their community.
Thank you.
Yep.
I love talking about this. I proudly lead the incredible person that leads our employee engagement program. And you're right. It all starts at the top. We have to have a foundational sort of level setting within an organization to set the standard on what expectations are to support our communities. And so that is really ground zero, but we also engage volunteer leaders throughout the country who do wonderful work utilizing the cyber grants tool to create things like team events, really creating that camaraderie. Through the platform, it makes it easy for employees to engage and find and fish for their own opportunities if they also want to do some things individually. But the game changer is the Cyber Grants Insights platform. The reason why Lauren was able to share the amazing stat that our employees achieved last year is because of Insights. We have a dashboard that tells us exactly what we're doing, and that's a game changer for me. It just putting data at our fingertips allows us to tell internally and externally. And it's really been exactly what we've needed for a long time. And Cyber Grants responded with Insights. So I'm incredibly appreciative of that, but certainly the tools that help operationalize it as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn. And I probably could ask you, as you know, a bunch more questions, but being mindful of the clock, I'm going to turn it back over to Ben, who I think is going to show us a little bit about fundraising strategy. I just want to thank you, Lynn and Larry and Mike, for sharing your fantastic stories with us. And then I will hand it over to Ben.
I'm going to be quick. We want to get over to the Q&A, and we also have the impact report that you can download. When you go on to the impact report landing page, one of the things that you can also do is we have this interactive portion of our website where you can enter in your average gift and your overall retention rate. If you don't know it, you can sort of estimate and guess, and it will plot you along a scatter plot, which you're seeing there. So you can kind of see what quadrant you're in. We split up organizations into quadrants, and then there's actionable advice that you can download for what quadrant you are and for ways to improve and move to a better quadrant. And you can look at yourself against other organizations in the same size and NTE code designation. So you can select those and look at yourself against your peers and the sector benchmark. And so with that, I'll pass it on.
Thank you. So, as a question, all is on the trust from the slides that we were looking to.
Kimberly, your audio might be a little off.
Yeah, Kimberly, we can't hear you, I don't think. Maybe you want me to run us through this? We have Q&A here that maybe we could get through. And maybe we can go to the next slide while we do the Q&A so people can download the Bonterra Impact Report if they'd like, and we can download the link. But we do have a Q&A here. Do you want me to read through them? And Kimberly, flag me if you're able to get your audio back. Oh, it's still garbled. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to go from the bottom up, I think. So the first question is, can you please provide more context details about the stat? Whose social feeds, the company's feeds, company's internet employee only feeds? Thanks. I'm not sure. That is related to employer giving, and I believe. Yeah, go ahead, Lauren. Do you have the answer to that?
I think this was on the screen. So it could be internally at your company, and Lynn may want to chime in if they have something similar at Ally. But really, when we want to drive up employee engagement, it's really around fostering that visibility into employee engagement programs. And as I mentioned, some healthy competition. So often we see at our corporate customers, there might be different teams, different departments that are doing a volunteer activity. So, maybe you pit the sales org against the marketing team, for example, and maybe you have an internal, if you use Slack or use Teams, where you're surfacing that. Again, it creates visibility and healthy competition that ends in good. But Lynn, I don't know if you want to chime in with anything you're doing at Ally.
So just totally echo, Lauren, what you say, but then just share the other resource that was there and underutilized. Our communications team has these plasma screens in all of our break rooms. And so now we're intentional about circulating volunteer opportunities and then showing photos of after the fact, et cetera, to create the momentum and build the excitement. But to your point, lots of healthy competition, particularly when executive leaders are involved and engaged. And so it makes it all the more fun. Although I will say it's not a real challenge to influence employees to do good in community. Thankfully, here at Ally, that's a norm.
73%. So
yeah.
So I'm hearing Kimberly's audio might be back.
Yep, I'm trying one more time. Oh, and I'm back. Sorry about that, everyone. We have one more question. It comes from Lawrence. I know that trust in nonprofits has been historically higher, but it seems that 57% is still rather strong compared to other institutions. Our culture seems distrustful and weary in general. Is that something that can be met on a larger scale or primarily on a one-on-one or small scale basis? And how about if I pop that over to Larry and Michael? You have done so much to build trust with your donors and supporters. What are some tactics or thoughts that you have around that? And Larry, you're on mute.
Yeah, I have to think about that a little bit. I think with trust, on the topic of trust, I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, in that we have this surround sound approach to our donors and constituents, and that they can hear from us in a number of ways. and they're not hearing anything typically for the first time through any one channel. And I feel like that builds trust. So if they can go to our social media account and see our chief historian walking a tract of land that they just heard about through email that we're saving, that really creates this environment of trust. Like, oh, I heard about it there, and there he is walking on it. So I feel like that's in practical terms, that's how we do it. I don't know if Mike, if you have got other thoughts.
Yeah, I'd say, just we're a preservation organization. And when we close on a preservation project, we celebrate that win with our supporters. For us, that's the final stage of stewardship. We deliver the tangible proof that we've done what we said we were going to do with our heart, with our heartfelt gratitude. So I think that that's a really important thing that we do to celebrate trust. We close that loop and say thanks. And that's we just celebrated, was it a week ago, Larry, our victory week. Annually we do one big week where we announce a couple sort of major victories. We just rolled through that, announcing over 200 acres saved at 4 different battlefields. And when we did that, we gave them all of the things that they like receiving from the American Battlefield Trust. We gave them the maps that show them exactly the property that they saved. We gave them virtual tours of those properties to look at. So we just try to deliver what we say we were going to deliver with an extraordinary amount of thanks, because we couldn't do what we do without our membership, and they know it.
That's a great example. Providing transparency, authenticity, gratitude, and realism throughout your communications and engagement with folks is really a big part of building trust, and will help. Starting from the very beginning, where we talked about the impact of stories, really also aligns with this as well. I know that we're out of time, and I want to thank everyone for being part of this discussion today. Michael, Lynn, Larry, Ben, Lauren, thank you for being part of this discussion. I want to give a big shout out to all of the Bonterrans who were part of the creation of this 2025 impact report. Thank you. Your work matters. And I hope that all of you are stepping away with some practical takeaways and some ideas, some fresh ideas as you move forward, and can share that with your teams. I encourage you to check out the full report, which includes those inspiring client stories and those handy metrics that you can share with your leadership and board. Yes, the world is changing. Yes, that brings challenges. But guess what? That also opens up the door to bold innovation. And that's what Bonterra is looking to do with you, partnering with you. And as we wrap, I just want to give a shout out to each of you who attended. Your work matters. Your commitment, your creativity, and your impact on the ground is what's making progress in our sector possible. And your efforts are the reason that this data exists. And it's why the generosity generation is gaining momentum. So the future of impact really is ours to shape, every single one of ours here today. So let's go out and build it together. Thank you. Have a fantastic afternoon.